So you may be thinking about breeding ball pythons, getting into some projects, maybe making an investment, and you're probably wondering, what is the future of the ball python market? And that is a very good question. I'm going to cover it in this video, and to really look forward and to see where we're going, really you have to look back and start at the very beginning. And believe it or not, before the ball python craze, ball pythons were considered kind of a trash snake. Nobody really wanted them. Nobody really looked at them. As a matter of fact, you can go in a pet store and buy a normal ball python. Well, this one's albino, but the normal wild type albino, you can buy them for like $5. They were really cheap. Nobody really, considered them an investment back then. And then somehow down the line, they came out with albinos. It's pretty much the first one on the scene. And a snake just like this started selling for over $12,000 per snake. And that's pretty much what started the ball python craze, when people started selling them for some big money. And then, pretty much the first ones on the scene were all the recessives. So you had the albino, you had the caramel albino, you had the pied, and they were all recessives. And the pieds, when the pieds came out, that is what really jump-started the ball python craze. Pieds were selling for $25,000 a piece, and it was back at a time where, like today, you make a $25,000 snake. There's not much of a market for it, but back then, everybody was lined up, standing in line to buy the pied ball pythons. People just couldn't produce enough. As a matter of fact, people were putting mortgages on their houses to buy these ball pythons. And once you started getting into ball pythons, the ball python money would pay off your mansions. That's how crazy it was. That is the early days of the ball python craze. And then really what happened is, after the recessives, some of the dominant and co-dominant genes came out. So for a recessive, for example, a snake like this, it's really kind of a long-term project. You breed this snake to a normal and you'll get hets, and then you have to breed the hets together to get the visuals. So everybody's, kind of working to get the visuals, to sell the visuals. But with co-dominant and dominant, you don't really have that. So for example, the kind of right after the piebald came out, the pinstripe and the spider and the coral glow, all those snakes came out, and they started selling for pretty much what the pieds were selling, $25,000, $35,000, and people were, spending a lot of money. I've actually seen some old videos where people are like, oh yeah, I just threw down $50,000 on a pair of coral glow ball pythons. I was like, that is crazy, because I don't think what they realized is you could take that coral glow, you could breed it to a bunch of normals, and 50% of the babies would come out coral glow. So it's not like a recessive where, if you bred it to normals, you get hets. You actually get the visuals the first time around. As a matter of fact, when people were heavily investing in some of these early snakes, some people made an incredible amount of money, and some people lost their shirt. Because remember, it takes 3 years, to breed the females. But if you have a co-dominant male, you can breed with pretty much within the first year, and then you're running it through your collection, producing an incredible amount of visuals, for the pinstripes and some of that stuff, and the prices came down really fast. And people who invested a lot of money lost a lot of money in a lot of cases. And that is pretty much the days where people would say, yeah, the ball python market is pretty much dead. And it's definitely not dead today, but if you talk to some of these old timers, this is what they're talking about. They're talking about back in the day when people were lined up to buy your $25,000 snakes, and the money was so fast and so easy. It was incredible. It was an amazing time. And then when it kind of crashed and everything came down, it pretty much flooded the market, and the market started coming down. That's when people started losing a lot of money, and it kind of soured the market, I would say. And here, pretty much at the present day, so if we move from there to now, originally there was like a handful of morphs, the albino, the caramel albino, the pinstripe, the pied and, and the coral glow and all that stuff, then you started out in the beginning of the market, there was only a handful of morphs, so you didn't have a lot of choices. And now, at the present day here in 2019, if you're watching this video, this is 2019, and the ball python market right now, I would say there is a large spectrum of prices and colors and patterns, a whole bunch of different morphs available. So you can invest as little as $50 for a normal ball python, all the way up to probably 25 or 30,000 for some of the new morphs coming on the market. And there's probably 300 plus base morphs on the scene right now. So back in the early days, in order to really invest, you needed to come up with, you know, $12, $15, $20,000 just to buy one. And you're talking about a pair, you know, you're talking about $50,000 investment, you know, mortgage the house, sell the car, let's buy some ball pythons. And now it is completely different. If you want to get in the ball python game, you can reach in your pocket and you pull out a handful of cash. Hey, whatever you got in your wallet, that is what you can invest and start getting into the ball python game. And as far as the future, I would say if you kind of look at the present, I would say it's almost building more and more and more, because what's really happening in the early days of ball pythons, we didn't have websites like Morph Market and Facebook and Instagram and all that where we can actually, you know, promote ball pythons, like YouTube, you know, and actually educate people and teach people. It was kind of a hidden market where a lot of people didn't know about it. And as a matter of fact, if I would have known about it in my early days, I probably would have tried to come up with a really large investment to get in the game. And here I am all these years later, and I started about 5 years ago, and it was pretty much the perfect timing for me, because I can invest as much as I feel comfortable with, all the way from the low end to the high end, and whatever I invest in is probably not what you're investing in. You know, it's completely different. You can invest as little or as much and get into any of these hundreds of morphs in the ball python game. And kind of looking towards the future, I would say if you look at the stuff coming out now, there's always new genes that keep popping up. You know, the scaleless head, the acid, I don't know if you've heard of the acid, or the hurricane, or the cypress. All that stuff is kind of the newcomers on the game. There's not a whole lot of them out there, and they still command a pretty high price. And as we advance further and further into the future, what really happens is we have the new morphs coming out on the really high end, and then as they become more and more popular, the price depreciates and it gets lower and lower. But keep in mind that it's always really been like that, pretty much from a really high end to a really low end. And what really happens now is every time we come out with a new morph, now that's like an extra color palette that we can add to everything that we're working with and kind of mix it in. So the further we go, the more it really builds and gains momentum, especially now that we have YouTube videos. You know, there's a lot of people on YouTube really showing off what they're making, the new stuff coming out. There's a lot of information. As a matter of fact, when I go to reptile shows now, today, and compared to 5 years ago, 5 years ago, let me tell you, there were not very many people at the reptile shows. And when I go to the reptile shows today, it is insane. Let me tell you, there are so many people. It's almost shoulder to shoulder at times, where these reptile shows, you almost need a coliseum to have, you know, reptile shows, you know, showing off some of these ball pythons. And as a matter of fact, when I first started in snakes, I started getting into like king snakes and woma pythons and a bunch of stuff like that. And then I went to my first reptile show. And let me tell you, all the people are crowded around the ball python tables at the shows, because you know there's always new stuff coming out. People want to see the new combos and what people have made the previous year. And you know, the prices come down every year a little bit for some of these. Some of them really hold their value, some of them come down really fast, and you can still lose a lot of money in the ball python game if you don't do it right. So for example, the scaleless head is one of the ones that, you know, I've heard a lot of people lose a lot of money money because I think it was just so popular and so many people got into it, and it just drove the price down really fast. So if you look at the scaleless head, it's pretty much really crashed really fast, and I would say that's kind of an exception to the rule. Normally there's not anything that's just, you know, changing, you know, it pretty much changed the whole market when the scaleless head came out and the scaleless ball python, and everyone wanted to jump on the bandwagon, get into the scaleless head. And there's really, I don't think, you know, since I've been in the ball python game, there's really nothing similar to the scaleless head that's really took a nosedive so fast where you can actually lose a lot of money. And I think it's just because it was so popular and so awesome. And I got into it kind of at the tail end. You know, I invested maybe $1,200 in the scaleless ball python game, but you know, as far as the future of everything else, I don't think you have to be worried at all. As a matter of fact, I think the future looks really bright. And when people are talking about the ball python market is dead, let me tell you, they are talking about now you have to actually work a little bit for your money. You know, it's, you know, you're making a few $100s, a few thousand at a time. You're not making tens of thousands, you know, hand over fist, you know, paying off your mansions with this ball python money like it used to be really fast and easy in the old days. So especially if you talk to some of these guys that have been in the ball python game for a long time, like 15 or 20 years, they say, well, it's good money, it's still a good market, but it's not like it used to be. And let me tell you, a lot of these people bought and paid for their entire reptile breeding facilities with the money from the good old days. It's not really the good old days anymore, but still it is really a hot market. As a matter of fact, a lot of these snakes are going kind of mainstream, I would say. Now we're actually seeing someone put a message under one of my videos, and they say, hey, I was in Petco the other day and I saw a banana pied. I was like, you know, when I started, banana pies were selling for thousands and thousands, and now they're coming down to, like, you can get them at the pet stores for $700, which is pretty amazing. So you can see they're kind of going from the collection. You get to a certain point where it gets really common in the industry, and a lot of these pet stores are actually picking up just the big chain pet stores, which is pretty awesome. So I don't think there's any worry about losing any money as far as, you know, worrying about if the ball python market is going to actually end. To me, it's always continually building bigger and bigger and bigger, and I don't really see an end in sight as far as it ever dying out, especially since there are so many morphs. You know, over 300 morphs, and every year we keep adding more and more different colors and patterns. And if that wasn't the case, and I think probably the biggest driver of the ball python market is the individual genes that you can mix together in a snake and then breed it back to another snake and get all those genes out in the pure form. And that is really what drives the ball python market. So for example, some of these other reptiles, they kind of get muddied and you're not really sure what you have. And there's a lot of, I would say, kind of a polymorphism in some of these morphs where the albinos all don't look like this. They all kind of have, you know, slightly different variations of a theme. And, you know, when you're hatching out albino ball pythons, you know 100% you have an albino, and all the albinos look the same, and it's pretty much the same across the board. You don't really have a question about what the morph is in most cases, unless it's a really subtle morph that you're talking about. So I kind of wanted to give you a quick tour of my reptile room. And let me tell you, if I didn't think the ball python market was going to be hot for the next 10, 20, 30 years plus, I would not have invested everything into ball pythons. Let me tell you, when I heard about it, and I just kind of measure in, you know, is this a good investment? You know, what else can I invest in? And to me, there's really no other investment that equals the potential of ball pythons. And really, if you think about it, if you invest on the low end of ball pythons, you're not going to make much money. If you invest on the high end, you have the potential to make a lot of money, but you also have the potential to lose a lot, especially if the prices drop for like the scaleless head or something like that. So what I've kind of done is I invested from the low end all the way to kind of the middle of the road. I don't have any really high-end stuff yet. Eventually I'm going to get there where I bring in some of these really high-end snakes. I'm not quite there yet to where I'm going to invest tens of thousands thousands on a single or a pair of ball pythons. It's, you know, it's quite the commitment to invest that heavily, especially up front. But you know, once you go down the road and you get into it, especially, you know, if I can sell 30 or 40 ball pythons and make that money and then reinvest, that's probably, you know, the money that I would actually invest into investing in some of these higher end projects. So I want to show you my reptile room real quick. Let me tell you, I have a lot of money invested in my setup here, and if it wasn't a good investment, I wouldn't have done it. It's definitely one of the best investments that I've ever seen. Let's check it out. All right, so this is my reptile room, and let me tell you, I have a whole bunch of equipment crammed in here. This is about 200 square feet all crammed into this space, and on this side I have all my grow outs, some of my stuff for sale, some of my holdbacks, some of my males, and I'm trying to move some of my bigger females over to the bigger tubs. But just take a look at this. Is, for example, this is my bamboo calico that I hatched out last year. What a stunner that is. That is a beautiful snake. And let's see what else. If I can show you a couple other ones. Here is a female lesser bamboo. This is a blue-eyed leucistic, and let me tell you, these snakes are these snakes are getting really big. I can't believe how big they're getting. These are eating pretty big rats. Look at that beautiful snake. And she actually has, if she'll show you her face, she actually has bright blue eyes, which is pretty cool. Look at that eye. She is a neat snake. And actually, I'm kind of on the fence whether to sell some of these or to keep them. I have I have a male pastel bamboo. I have a lemon blast scaleless head. Look at that snake. Oh my goodness. She is a beauty. Just a lemon blast, but she's got the scaleless head. Well, actually, when I hatched this out, these were selling probably, I think these were selling for about $8,000 at the time when I hatched them out. So the price has already come down. They're selling, you know, the hatchlings probably for $1,000, and you know, for something this big, probably a little bit more. So you can see that the prices do come down, but you know, I actually bought my scaleless head male for $1,200. I've bred it through and made a bunch of stuff, so I'm definitely not losing anything. So this was my hatchling rack that I had completely full, and I just have one more snake over here because I can't fit it in the other rack, and he is almost too big for this. I'm gonna have him at the next show in 4 weeks, just a male bamboo. And these are all my breeders that I've been breeding. This girl's, I actually still have some normals. I have an albino het pied female, and she's kind of stuck in a shed. She's a really neat snake. I have a pied female up here. A big old pied. I'm hoping she'll actually lay some eggs. I have a whole bunch of snakes. And then this is actually one of my reticulated pythons. This one actually looks like, this is Sunny. It looks like he is going into a shed. It's definitely turning blue. He's usually really bright colored. Definitely have to give him a little more humidity in here so he makes it through the shed okay. But I'm breeding those kind of as a side note, but mostly everything else is ball pythons. And then over here I have all my rats and mice. These are all rats over here, and then over there I have some rats on the bottom, 2 rows of mice on the top. And that is pretty much my setup. Oh, over here in the corner, kind of squeezed in here. This is I have some frogs in here, some Pac-Man frogs. I have a couple geckos that I put in this glass tank. And over here in the corner, if you could take a look at this, this actually, once I hit the hatchling season, once I start breeding some hatchlings, this holds 65 hatchlings in this ARS 1065. And this thing was almost completely full with my other one last year. I had almost 100 hatchlings. It was an incredible amount of snakes. Let me tell you, it was a lot of work to feed all those until I actually sold them. But it was a blast having so many snakes. And now I'm about 100 less than I was at that point. I had a lot of snakes. And then let me show you real quick, I have another reticulated python on my pool table, And I'll show you quickly my incubator. So this is Lucy, my reticulated python. She is 50% dwarf Jampea. She is, I think she might lay eggs this year. She's looking pretty beefy. She's been eating a lot of rats too, so I'm not sure. Look at how thick she is right in there. We weighed her last at 67.2 pounds, and I probably fed her, I'd say 5 or 6 rats since then, so she's probably well over 70 pounds now, but hopefully she'll lay eggs. She's looking like she might. She's looking pretty beefy. If she lays some eggs, I'll probably have 35 to 40 eggs from that girl. That's going to be pretty impressive. So here's my incubator. This is a 6-foot tall incubator that I built out of a beverage cooler, and right now I have 33 ball python eggs in there, and they are due to hatch next week, as a matter of fact, so you'll see an upcoming video when those eggs hatch. That will be pretty exciting. So if someone were to ask me when is the best time to get into the ball python game, I would say now is the best time ever. I mean, really, there's the biggest variety of ball pythons. There's the biggest drive that I have ever seen as far as the demand for these ball python morphs. And it doesn't really matter what you're getting into. There's a demand for pretty much everything. This one happens to be a lesser clown. These clowns are always in demand. They've always been in really high demand. I would say clowns are really good to get into. There's always people looking for clown ball pythons, and pieds and albinos and pretty much anything you get into. There's some stuff, you know what, actually, if you're getting into the ball python game, what I would highly recommend is go to one of your reptile shows and see what they have as far as your competition, because really you're competing with the guy across the room on the other table at the reptile shows, and really what you want to do is you want to get into something that nobody else has. And that's kind of what I did with the bamboo when I brought it to Colorado. Nobody had bamboos, and I thought, I'm going to get into bamboos. Let me tell you, it was a big hit. And now I'm thinking of getting into something else that nobody really has a lot of. And some people have clowns, but there's not a whole lot of clowns that I've seen at a lot of the local reptile shows. So I'm hoping to really increase my production of clown ball pythons. And they always want to go towards the camera. It's really interesting. These snakes are really interesting. I think they're just drawn to the camera. Anyway, that is my thoughts on the ball python market. It's definitely hotter than ever. It's not dead. It's not like it used to be. And let me tell you, you can't make money as easy, but you can still make some pretty good money, and you can have fun in the meantime. So thanks for watching, and I will see you next time.